what the media thought of you guys.
UFC 300 makes no sense. Is any fight on this card 300 worthy? No.
This is the most diabolically disappointing UFC 300 announcement ever.
It feels kind of thrown together. It doesn't feel like the culmination of something big.
We were continually told that it's going to knock your socks off. It's going to be amazing.
What did Dana say about this guy? We're going to blow their socks off. I wanted my jaw to hit the fucking ground.
I did expect a little bit more from the company to blow us away.
Nobody got blown away. Nobody.
We need people that know the sport to be running the show because this is pathetic.
UFC 300.
Welcome back to Based MMA. In this video, I'm going to be talking about Mr. Dana White because today he came out with this video basically exposing a lot of MMA YouTubers and journalists for criticizing UFC 300. And Mr. Dana White thinks he's all badass now because now he could go back and trash these MMA YouTubers like Lucas Tracy. Like, I don't think he mentioned MMA Guru. He mentioned Ariel Helwani. And you know, some of these MMA journalists are pretty trash, but I'm here to keep Dana White accountable because he wants to act like he knew it all along that UFC 300 was going to be a banger. He wants to come out and trash these MMA YouTubers like Lucas Tracy, anybody that criticized UFC 300. I was one of those people that made a video criticizing UFC 300. But in this video, I'm going to expose Mr. Dana White. I am not going to forget the fact that Dana White was scrambling to get a main event for UFC 300. This man did not have a main event for UFC 300. He had to call Jamal Hill after UFC 298 to try to find a main event for UFC 300. And all these MMA YouTubers, we were kind of right. You know, obviously hindsight is 2020. The event actually delivered. I enjoyed UFC 300. It was one of the best events. I don't think it was the best main card of all time. I think it had the best prelims of all time. But still, like, the card delivered. But Dana White cannot come out and say, oh, you guys were all wrong. You guys were all wrong. When in the end, when at the beginning, this man was scrambling for a main event for 300. Leon Edwards was supposed to fight on this card. They didn't book him for this card. I'm not too sure why. They probably didn't want to put Bilal Muhammad on 300. You know, they really didn't have a main event. You know, Dricus du Plessis was not going to be ready to fight Israel Adesanya on 300. You know, Pereira and Jamal Hill were supposed to fight at UFC 301 in Brazil, which made a lot more sense. And now UFC 301 is kind of a mess. It's kind of lackluster. So Dana White can't come out and say that he had it all under control when we know that UFC 300 was a disaster. Like, the fact that the card actually delivered in the end, thank God that it finally delivered and that it was an amazing card. But Dana White cannot come out and be all salty that people were criticizing UFC 300 when we were actually right, man. The fact that, you know, Dana White came out in a live stream and made us wait for 3 hours, 4 hours to announce Yang Wei Li versus Yang Xiaonan as one of the big fights on 300, or the fact that he made this big, you know, deal of Kayla Harrison fighting Holly Holm at UFC 300. Like, bro, stop. And I hate these pretentious, you know, Dana White's cocksucking journalists who want to come out and say, bro, Kayla Harrison versus Holly Holm, banger, what a banger of a matchup. Oh, Andrade versus Marina Rodriguez, what a fucking banger. You guys don't appreciate any, bro, shut the hell up. Like, you're just a wannabe hardcore MMA fan. Like, let's be honest, when those fights got announced, they were absolute dog shit. And I'm gonna be honest, like, I think UFC 300 is a bit overrated. I don't think it's the greatest card of all time, maybe in terms of names, but you know, remove Yuri versus Rakic, remove the last 10 seconds of Gaethje versus Holloway, and UFC 300 is a fine card. You know, it wasn't like this mind-blowing card. And at the time, I remember that I was criticizing the card. You know, Lucas Tracy was criticizing the card. You know, MMA Guru was criticizing the card. But we were criticizing the card because it didn't have any, like, amazing matchup or wow fight that was really gonna blow the fans, especially when it came to the main event. Obviously, Charles Oliveira versus Armin Strickland is a banger of a matchup. Gaethje versus Holloway at the time really didn't make too much sense in terms of, like, okay, Justin Gaethje was most likely going to fight for the title. You know, who's gonna fight Islam Makhachev? You basically eliminate any contender for Islam Makhachev to fight in June, which it kind of did in the end, which is why Dustin Poirier was able to get a title shot. And to be totally honest with you, UFC 300 was a disaster. Like, it was a disaster. Thankfully, it came out good in the end, but Dana White can't come out and pretend now and want to point at these MMA journalists and YouTubers and try to criticize them for criticizing UFC 300 when in reality we were right. You know, it was a disaster. You were scrambling to come up with a main event for UFC 300. You know, Jamal Hill even had said before that he wasn't necessarily going to be ready for 300 and that he was looking to come back in May. You know, you had to call him last minute after UFC 298 when you really didn't have a fight announcement. Even Jamal Hill said, look, they just announced the fight. I got the call when I got into the arena at UFC 298, and I said, yeah, I'm down. You know what I'm saying? So Dana White can't come out and say that it was all part of the plan and at UFC 300, you know, all you MMA fans were wrong. And I'm gonna talk about something else as well. All these NPC MMA journalists, they're jealous. They're jealous of the MMA YouTube community. They're jealous of YouTubers like Lucas Tracy, like MMA Guru, who have blown up, Bedtime MMA. You know, I wouldn't really put myself in that league because I'm still a very small YouTuber, but I think they're jealous of us. They're jealous that we get momentum, that people are tuning in to watch more guys like Lucas Tracy, like, who's the other guy? MMA Guru. I feel like I'm missing one. Somebody that was in that compilation as well. I'm forgetting the guy. Jesse on Fire. People are tuning in to watch these MMA YouTubers rather than these typical MMA NPC journalists who just love to dick ride Dana White, and they're jealous of us. I think they're truly jealous of us, and it's kind of funny because, you know, they want to act like, you know, we're casuals because we were criticizing Rodriguez versus Andrade and Holly Holm versus Kayla Harrison and Yang Weili versus Zhang Yanan. But we weren't criticizing the fights. We just said, okay, I feel like these fights really have no place on UFC 300. And to be totally honest with you, even after the event, I still agree with my point. I still agree with a lot of what Lucas Tracy was saying at the time. So Dana White can't come out and be all fucking salty that people were criticizing UFC 300 just because the event turned out to be a lot more successful, just because Gaethje Holloway was one of the biggest moments in UFC history, especially those last 10 seconds. But, you know, he wants to act like he knew it all along and, oh, how can you doubt me? How can you doubt me? Bro, you were scrambling for a main event for UFC 300. You think we're going to forget? You think we're going to forget that you were scrambling for a main event for UFC 300, or when you came out and said that you had crazy fight announcements, you had a special fight? When this guy said that he had a special fight that had fallen into his lap, how is that not setting up expectations? Like, you were setting up UFC 300 to be the wildest card ever. Everybody was expecting a crazy main event, and no disrespect to Jamal Hill and Alex Pereira. I love that matchup when it got announced. I wasn't really shitting on that main event. If you don't believe me, go back and rewatch some of my old videos. But I can't lie. Like, I understand why people were criticizing the main event because it wasn't anything crazy or special like you were hyping it out to be. Now, I understand Dana White was trying to get that big main event behind the scenes. He was trying to get, you know, Islam Makhachev versus Leon Edwards, which would have been an incredible main event, or maybe an Israel Adesanya versus Alex Pereira. I think that would have been also incredible for them to settle it at UFC 300. I think it would have been more fitting. But I understand that Dana White wants to keep the division moving. So in the end, he made the right moves, but he can't come out and just criticize MMA YouTubers for them criticizing UFC 300 at the time. Because let's be honest, like, this main event didn't get announced until, you know, 7 to 8 weeks prior, which is not a lot of time for Jamal Hill. He had to call Jamal Hill last minute. He hyped up Yang Weili versus Zhang Yanan. He hyped up, what's that fight? Holly Holm versus Kayla Harrison. I mean, I just hate these pretentious hardcore MMA wannabes that just love everything the UFC does and they want to act like the card wasn't an absolute disaster. I still think the card could have been a little bit better in terms of matchups. Thankfully, the card delivered. It was one of the most iconic cards. I love the card, but Dana White just can't sit at his almighty chair and think that, oh, I'm so much better, and oh, look at these MMA YouTubers, I kept receipts. Like, shut the fuck up, man. I also keep receipts, and I remember you were scrambling for a main event for UFC 300.